Welcome. Welcome. Welcome to this very special event. We are very pleased to have you join us for the International Day of Peace 2020, and what a year it is turning out to be. There is a lot in store for you today with some very special guests. So do hang on, because we've got some excellent, I think we have a bit of a, sorry, I hope there is no, okay, all right, thank you. I just thought I got a message about technology, but all good. Just to let you know that the technology is what it is, so we are patient with that. Letting you also know that we have an excellent lineup of panelists and speakers today, and we're pleased to have you with us. The questions that you'll be able to post are there on the chat, and I can see that it's already going off, which is terrific. We have an opportunity for you to pose questions on the chat. I will have to apologise that we don't have the option at the moment for closed captions due to some technological issues, but there will be the opportunity for you to download the transcript and see the captions when the YouTube clip is put up later tonight or tomorrow morning when you visit. Now, the theme for this event today is Shaping Peace Together, and that really is what we are trying to do today. That's the aim of the conversations that we will have and our actions that will stem from today's conversations. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to a very special speaker today. Telma Nascimento is a Brazilian-born woman who has fully embraced multiculturalism when she first arrived in Australia, and certainly at Victorian University as a student. In fact, she's the chair of the VU Cultural Diversity Student Network and the Vice President of VU Auslan Society and Secretary of VU Multicultural Club. She's currently studying her third year of a Bachelor of Arts in Social Work. So welcome to Telma Nascimento.
Thank you, Teresa. On behalf of Victoria University, I would like to acknowledge the ancestors, elders, and families of the first peoples of the various lands upon which we meet. We acknowledge that the lands on which our forum tonight takes place is the place of age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation, and renewal that belongs to our indigenous people. Our first peoples are the custodians of the land and have been for many centuries. As we share our own knowledge practices within the university, may we pay respect to the deep knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal community and their ownership to country. Today marks the International Day of Peace, as Dr. Teresa said, and this year the theme is Shaping Peace Together. But what exactly does peace mean? The United Nations says that peace embraces far more than an absence of conflict. It encompasses tolerance, disarmament, sustainable economic and social development, democratic participation, gender equality, freedom of expression, and respect for human rights. For me, peace means waking up to the birds singing, having contact with nature right in front of my house, not having to hide my phone when I'm outside, and witness my child growing up in a safe and free place. The United Nations is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year at a time of great challenge, which has impacted the way we view and experience peace. For us to achieve a culture of peace, there needs to be a transformation of individual behavior as well as institutional practices. Education and awareness raising are key in this process. We need to connect, to enrich, and to celebrate the differences that make each and every one of us unique. When people from diverse cultures get together, they bring different knowledge and points of view. For me, that is the only way for a life of dignity and well-being for all. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you a person who was instrumental in establishing the Cultural Diversity Office at VU. Professor Peter Dawkins has been Vice Chancellor and President of Victoria University since January 2011. This follows 6 years in high-level leadership roles for the Victorian government and 28 years in the university sector. Peter leads VU's vision, strategic direction, and student experience. He is currently leading a transformation agenda at Victoria University that is shaping the university between now and 2030, including the implementation of the VU Way, VU's unique approach to learning and teaching in block mode. Peter is passionate about growing Victoria University as the university of opportunity and success. He believes in opportunity for all, that any student from any background has the right to access quality education to set them up for success. Peter was awarded an Order of Australia in the 2017 Queen's Birthday Honours List for his outstanding service to tertiary education as an administrator and academic. Over to you, Vice Chancellor.
Well, thank you very much, Thelma, and we're delighted that you are leading the VU Cultural Diversity Student Network as President, and it's wonderful to see you take up the role as facilitator tonight. So, good afternoon, everyone, and as Thelma said, I'm Peter Dawkins, Vice Chancellor and President of Victoria University, and in my 10th year as Vice Chancellor, and will be retiring at the end of this year, so this will be, I guess, my last forum of this particular kind, and I would like to say how much I've enjoyed being involved in a wide range of cultural diversity events, working closely with Teresa de Fercio. And today our forum is the International Peace Forum and official VU Multicultural Week launch. And I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land that each of us are on, and their elders past, present and emerging. I welcome our distinguished guests today, our Chancellor, Gay Hamilton, and Council members, Chair of the Victorian Multicultural Commission, Vivienne Nguyen, and Commissioners, Mr. Wei Tai, Deputy Chair, Victorian Multicultural Commission, Nick Hatzoglu, Football Victoria, Sonia Vinovich, Settlement Services, Australia, Craig Foster, Sports Commentator and Refugee Advocate, Malaysian Consul General Mazita Masuki, Amit Keskin, the Australian Intercultural Society, one of our major partners in events of this kind, Charlie Allen, Institute of Economics for Peace, Ms. Rohini Kabadath, General Manager of the Immigration Museum. So our own Associate Professor Tom Clark, Chair of our Academic Board at Victoria University. All other distinguished guests, representatives of the Department of Education, local government, Crime Stoppers, Ethnic Communities Council of New Zealand, Victorian Public Sector Commission, AIMS, the Australian Defence Force, colleagues, partners and students. I welcome you all to this special event from the various lands on which you stand. We all gather tonight to explore the notion of peace. The event is part of a worldwide programme of events marking the UN 75th anniversary of International Day of Peace. The theme this year is Shaping Peace Together. And through hosting this event tonight, together with our partners, we aspire to contribute and play our part in shaping peace. 2020 has certainly been a difficult year in terms of peace. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented challenges as an Australian community and as part of a global community. We've seen that despite our differences, we need to, and we're better off when we all contribute to shaping peace together. When we understand and embrace our diversity, we find that we've ways of coming together to find solutions that suit all of us, not just some of us. When we ignore the rich diversity of perspectives, approaches, ways of thinking and living, we end up escalating and prolonging problems. At VU, we're very proud of our diversity, and I'm very pleased to use this event to launch the VU Multicultural Week, an annual week-long series of activities that reflects the three pillars of our cultural diversity strategy: enrichment, connection, and celebration. I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate a peacekeeper in our community, Mr. Wei Tai. Wei was recently appointed Deputy Chair of the Victorian Multicultural Commission. who are one of the partners of the event tonight. We're very pleased to have such strong relationship with the VMC and we are delighted in your appointment and we congratulate you. Your own refugee journey and settlement in Australia resonates with many in our own VU community. You demonstrate just how important peace is to ensuring each individual can reach their potential and live fulfilling life. I'd also like to acknowledge the moderator of the forum tonight, or the originator of it, Ms. Dr. Teresa De Fazio, who I mentioned earlier. It's been great working with her in her role of heading up the VU Cultural Diversity Office, who along with the panellists has a strong track record herself contributing to social cohesion and peacemaking. Finally, to all our partners and today's panellists, I thank you for supporting this very special event and look forward to the discussion this evening and the entertainment. And thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Vice Chancellor. Next, we will hear from Boete, who is the Deputy Chair of the Victorian Multicultural Commission. He is a passionate advocate for a multicultural Australia, holding many leadership roles within Victoria's multicultural sector, with a focus on education and employment for new and emerging communities. He has received a range of community and academic awards for his contributions, including the VMC's 2018 Emerging Leadership in Multiculturalism Award. Boe arrived in Australia in 2009 as a refugee migrant. He is the migrant student and community liaison at the Swinburne University of Technology. Welcome, Boete.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you, Vice Chancellor Professor Peter Dawkins. Good evening, everyone. I am very, very delighted that I can be here with you all this evening and be part of this wonderful initiative and important discussion. I would like to begin by paying my respect to the traditional owners of the land where I'm joining this discussion from. And I take this opportunity to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I would also like to pay my respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who are attending this event today. I'd like to acknowledge Vice Chancellor Professor Peter Dawkins, our MC, and my dear friend Teresa, and to our extraordinary lineup of guest speakers in the panel, Mr. Charles Allen, Craig Foster, Rohini Kapatta, and Mazita Marzuki, and Associate Professor Tom Clark, and also extended to all the distinguished guests who are present today. I'm honored to be here to acknowledge the International Peace Day. I want to thank Victoria University for organizing this event and bringing together such an amazing panel to explore the notion of peace, especially as we respond to increasing challenges to social cohesion. The Victorian Multicultural Commission is delighted to support this forum, and I thank you all for coming. My thanks also to the Institute for Economics and Peace and the Australian Intercultural Society for partnering on this important and timely forum. This year has been a challenging for all Victorians, so it is important we take the time to reflect and celebrate the day by spreading compassion, kindness, and hope. Coronavirus continues to cause significant uncertainty for millions of people across the world. We know that in challenging times like these, our communities are stronger when we come together to support one another. That's why for International Day of Peace this year, the Victorian Multicultural Commission is focusing on finding moments of solidarity and peace in uncertain times. If we can build peace for ourselves, our families, and the small number of people around us, we can collectively build peace at a greater level. Compassion, equality, kindness, and harmony are the things that come to my mind when I think of peace. As mentioned, my journey as a lived experience as a refugee, living for many years in a refugee camp, peace is the only hope that we could dream about. Until today, it is very much part of my dream so that we can have world peace. I also want to mention that we should never take for granted the peace we have here in Australia. And we all have a responsibility to continuously looking for ways we can promote peace and harmony here in Australia and beyond our shores. Australia has a key role to play in promoting peace in the region to developing countries. And so we all can help shape the peace in this region. My lived experience has taught me that when given the opportunities, anybody can thrive, can participate and contribute. And hence, peace is fundamental to everyone. It has such a profound impact on my life. And I'm sure that through the work we do together in promoting peace, we can touch many more lives in the future. Thank you all for inviting me to be involved in this special event, and I hope you enjoy the forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Buete. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Teresa De Fazio to begin the panel session. Teresa is the Manager of Cultural Diversity at Victoria University. She acknowledges that her early work with refugees, migrants, international students, and her own lived experience as a child of migrants helped shape her view of multiculturalism. She is a VU academic, former commissioner of the Victoria Multicultural Commission, board director, Multicultural Arts Victoria, member of the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria, community ambassador for Melbourne Victory Football Club, and is a Women's Advisory Committee member for FECA. Please, Dr. Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you, Telman. Thank you, Boy. And thank you, Vice-Chancellor. Now, I'd like to introduce you, to our panelists, and you've already had a little bit of background on each of them. Each of them work towards peace, not only in their professional roles, but above and beyond, often in a community contribution. And all of them, as you will see, instrumental peace shapers, peacemakers, and here tonight to provide us with their insights and their reflections on going forward. So we're very, very pleased and honoured to have you. As I explained earlier, we have an opportunity for you to put your questions into the chat box, and I've already received some of the questions as part of the registration process. And what I will do is keep synthesizing some of the questions so that we can get through as many as we can. So if there are questions with themes that intersect, then this will provide us with an opportunity to get through as many as possible and do justice to the questions you're posing. But first of all, we have an opportunity for each of the presenters to provide a presentation from their particular perspectives. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Mr. Charlie Allen from the Institute for Economics and Peace, and he is the Director of Partnerships there. And we'll have Charlie.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you for the opportunity to celebrate UN International Day of Peace with you all. I'm sitting up here in Sydney. I'm on Camaragal country, so I'd like to acknowledge the Camaragal people, the country that I'm sitting upon, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I always find it interesting to think about the longest living culture. What is it that the longest living culture understood around peace, and how to live as a system with their social system within their social system within their ecosystem to be the longest living culture. So I feel we have a lot to learn from the Australian Aboriginal community. So thank you for first of all for Thelma. She shared a couple of definition of peace, a UN definition of peace, and also how she interpreted peace. Way similarly shared with us his definition, how he envisaged peace. I said there's over 100 people have joined this event tonight, and I'm sure if we asked everyone what their version, how they envisage peace, we'd have over 100 different versions. So I want you to just take a second now to think, what is it? How is it that you define peace? How do you hold peace in your mind? Just bring up that image. I'm not going to ask you for it, so please just let your imagination think about how you envisage peace while I bring up the presentation. Okay, the Institute for Economics and Peace, the organisation that I work for, is an independent not-for-profit think tank. We're an Australia-based organisation with a global footprint with offices around the globe, but headquartered here in Sydney. And really, we're in the business of measuring peace. Not only do we measure peace, but we also put a cost on its economic benefit, and we put a cost on the impact of violence. You can see in this slide some of our key reports which are produced annually. Our most known report is the Global Peace Index. It's in its 2020 version. It was released in June of this year. This report is freely available on our website, Vision of Humanity. To be consistent or not to be tone deaf to the current environment, we also produced at the same time with our 2020 Global Peace Index a paper a briefing looking at the impact of COVID-19 on peace. So the Institute, we are in the business of producing research around peace. And why do we do that? It's pretty simple. You can't manage what you don't measure. So we produce research that and we work hard at making that research available, readable and practical and usable. And you can see from this data that we have a phenomenal global reach with our research. It's used from a wide range of practitioners through to multilateral organisations to use it to inform their policy. We're picked up in thousands of university courses, and our reports are downloaded with a great frequency. If you're going to measure something, you really need to start with a definition. And we use two definitions. First of all, we use a negative definition of peace, being the absence of violence and absence or fear of violence. And we use that definition to build the Global Peace Index, which I'll touch on briefly. But more excitingly, we measure peace from a positive perspective. And that came out some of the definitions from Thelma and also from Way. And that definition being the attitudes, institutions and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. So I'll just touch on the Global Peace Index. The Global Peace Index in its 14th year, which is significant, gives us over a decade and nearly a decade and a half of data to look at global trends around peacefulness. It measures 163 countries. It's not all of the countries, but 99 covers off on 99.7% of the global population. We don't look at a country and say, oh yes, it's peaceful or not. We look at countries and rank them from the most peaceful to the least peaceful by aggregating 23 indicators of negative peace. So what does so we, as I said, 23 indicators. We measure those 23 indicators across 3 domains, being conflict, so domestic and international conflict, measures of societal safety, so that sort of picks up internal indicators such as homicide rate, violent crime, impact of terrorism, and also measures of militarisation, as you would expect. So what does the globe look like? When you colour the globe based on countries' peacefulness, you can see the deep red countries are the least peaceful countries, the deep green countries are the most peaceful countries. You can see Australia there, glowing nice deep green colour. This map is available on our website, Vision of Humanity, and you can hover over a country of interest and see the data that sits behind that particular country. So in 2020, the globe has become less peaceful. Probably didn't need our indice to know that, but it's deteriorated by 0.344%. But certainly what we can do is demonstrate that empirically. You can see that what is concerning is this is the 9th deterioration we've had in a 12-year period. In 2020, 81 countries became more peaceful, 80 countries deteriorated. You can see from that the countries that deteriorated by a greater amount. And very quickly, looking at what drove those improvements, impact of terrorism, improvement in homicide rates, improvement in weapons imports and exports. What drove down the scales, political terror scale, IDPs, refugees continues to climb, as does the intensity of internal conflict. 10 most peaceful countries, there they are. You can see that Europe is well represented there, as is our region. 10 least peaceful countries. Afghanistan, the least peaceful country on the globe. Syria held that position for quite some time, but Syria has had a decrease in battlefield deaths and the impact of terrorism, which has driven Afghanistan down. You can see that the MENA countries, so Middle East and Northern Africa countries, and the sub-Saharan countries are overrepresented in the least peaceful countries. So that was looking at 2020. When you look at trends in peace, remember I said we've been doing this work for nearly a decade and a half. So if you look at the trend line over that period of time, you can see that that trend line going up. Don't get excited about that. The bigger the number, the less peaceful. So the globe has trended to become less peaceful over that 12-year period of time. You can see from the bottom bar graph that in that last 12-year period, we've only had 3 years when peacefulness has improved. The remaining peacefulness has deteriorated. So if you look at the macro level data over the last decade, the globe has decreased in peacefulness by 2.5%, looking at peace from that negative indicator, or measuring peace from those negative indicators. 81 countries become less peaceful and 79 countries become more peaceful. I'll just make an observation about that. A couple of observations. First of all, if you break that down into domains, the domain that has driven peacefulness down has been ongoing conflict. You can see militarisation has actually improved. So by militarisation, some of the things we measure there are the percentage of GDP spent on military, number of armed service personnel per 100,000. There's a range of other indicators that we measure. So militarisation has actually improved. Those internal measures of security and safety has stayed somewhat, has trended up slightly, but conflict is the indicators that has really driven down global peacefulness. And this is a concerning graph when you look at the least peaceful countries have become less peaceful at a higher rate, and the most peaceful countries continue to become more peaceful. So there's this inequity in peace. It's a bit like that saying, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. It's very similar with peacefulness. The more peaceful countries are getting more peaceful, least peaceful countries are getting less peaceful at a higher rate. So I'm just going to touch on positive peace to finish my bit of time. So as I said, we measured peace using 2 different definitions. and measuring peace using this positive definition, being the attitudes, institutions and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies, is certainly more useful when you're looking to want to understand what it is that creates peacefulness. So, if you want to study light, you don't study darkness. Studying conflict and understanding what is driving conflict is not going to give the answer to what builds a peaceful community. So certainly this research around positive peace is far more useful in operationalising to build more peaceful communities, build more peaceful countries. So we looked at some 30,000 different data sets to understand what it is that correlates most closely to peacefulness. We're able to identify 24 indicators which we've built into this taxonomy, which we call our positive peace framework. And that sort of sits behind my work, is how to operationalise this framework globally, whether that's through education, through having an influence on policy, or at grassroots level in community peace building. So we know that positive peace builds higher levels of positive peace, builds stronger resilience, builds better environmental outcomes, high measures of well-being, better performance against development goals, and has better performance against a range of economic indicators. So I encourage you to visit our website and to follow our work. There's a range of ways you can follow our work. If there was a call to action I offered today, that was, first of all, we have Positive Peace Academy, which is a free online resource where people can get a deeper understanding of the concept of positive peace. We've just launched our current IEP Ambassadors Program. People are certainly freely available to sign on to the Ambassadors Program. And if you're interested in that concept of operationalising positive peace, please reach out to us. Thank you for the opportunity. Now I hand back to Teresa.
Thank you, Charlie. That's a lot of information, and I certainly recommend that you do take up the invitation extended to follow up on the data that's presented and the work of the Institute. It's remarkable and extremely important in this conversation. And I'd like to now pass on over to Consul General Matsuta Matsuki, who is the Consul General of Malaysia, and she's a senior diplomat with a strong background in diplomacy and security. And prior to her posting in Australia, Consul General Matsuta was the Deputy Director General of the Southeast Asia Regional Centre for Counter-Terrorism. And she has experience in the Embassy of Malaysia in Abu Dhabi, and as the Deputy Chief of Mission, and she also has had a range of leadership roles for the Ministry of Health in Malaysia. She is an alumni of the Golden Gate University in San Francisco and received an Outstanding Student of the Year award in her study major, which is actually conflict resolution and negotiations. Thank you very much, Consul General, for joining us this afternoon.
No, thank you so much, Teresa, for having me. So firstly, thank you, Dr. Teresa, for that welcoming remark, and thank you for inviting me to be part of today's discussion. I am so humbled to be among the panelists today, and I think it is a right mix indeed, especially when we are discussing on subject that is much needed now more than ever, peace. It's great to be here virtually to celebrate International Peace Day Forum. Coincidentally, Malaysia recently celebrated our National Day and Malaysia Day, 31st August and 16 September respectively, two most sacred dates for us Malaysians. And what these 2 days means to us is exactly what we are discussing today. It's peace. When you realize that no more blood will spill, when you know that you do not need to hide from your enemy, you can walk freely on the street without worrying about who or what will come after you. Now, that is peace, precisely that. Case in point would be how Malaysia achieved independence. It was through peaceful negotiation. Today, as how Dr. Teresa had introduced me, is where I put on a different hat. My former post or assignment was as the Deputy Director General for Southeast Asia Regional Centre for Counterterrorism, as we called it, SIASAT in abbreviations. Mouthful indeed, and not just a title. The work that goes behind it was challenging but exciting to me. Many students or Malaysian community are more interested to know me due to that background. Some would think it's like talking to a spy or an agent of some kind. Well, it's not Homeland TV series, but interesting enough to state that there are agencies similar to what you may see on TV that the establishment collaborate with. Nothing to hide there. I will touch a little bit on what the establishment does, as I think it would be more relevant in this discussion, whereby it would only be appropriate if I were to share on Siasat's role in the effort of countering terrorism. How is it related to today's topic? Well, terrorism is the challenge to achieve peace in the world we live in. Hence, we have to counter it no matter what it takes. And believe it or not, all of us can contribute to countering it. Before we go into the definition of an understanding of terrorism, many people ask us this question: how does one become a terrorist? How did it come to that level of killing people without conscience? Yes, it is mind-blowing if we were to figure that out. I can't speak in the context of psychology, as I am not an expert on that, and I will not go on the aspect of technicality. That would be in a different forum. But from my humble experience, the easiest way to explain it would be this. It starts from hate, hatred. That feeling is, if it's not addressed in any way, it will lead to more negativity, and one can turn to be radical with that understanding. Hence, in the long run, their ideology will be an extremist ideology, and regrettably for some at this point, they will have no remorse to act upon what they believe is right. Hence, a terrorist will be formed. Before we move on, I would like to ask ourselves, do we really understand what terrorism is? What constitutes terrorism? Who are terrorists? For any researcher or policymaker, the journey to understand certain issues begins with defining the terms, understanding the context, comprehending the nuances, and setting in place the terms of reference. Unfortunately, until today, there is no universally accepted definition of terrorism, as nations have not been able to agree on a single definition that clearly illustrates what constitutes as terrorism. The Routledge Handbook of Terrorism listed 260 definitions of terrorism. Interestingly, as what Professor Alex Smith and Albert Jongman have said, authors have spilled almost as much ink trying to define the concept in terrorism and radicalization as the actors of terrorism have spilled blood. Notwithstanding, we have yet to come up with a clear definition of terrorism, it does not stop us from deliberating and addressing these issues. Ladies and gentlemen, so going back to what I have mentioned earlier, we can generally agree that terrorism means using violence to achieve one's objective. Terrorism is non-religion. From September 11 attack to the Christchurch attack, whether you are an Islamist extremist or a white supremacist, whether it is non-organized group or a lone wolf act, once you use violence for whatever purpose that you may think right to you, that's terrorism. The United Nations in its UNGA Resolution 4960 describes terrorism as criminal acts intended or calculated to provoke a state of terror in the general public. A group of persons or particular persons for political purposes are in any circumstance unjustifiable, whatever the considerations of a political, philosophical, ideological, racial, ethnic, religious, or any other nature that may invoke to justify them. Yes, it is quite a mouthful definition, but the general idea though is that terrorism can essentially be seen as an act of violence against civilians or non-combatants motivated by political reasons. It is an act whereby the perpetrators target civilians, destroy property, and generate fear among a group of people with the intention to change certain political status quo that they perceive to be unfair, unjust, or repressive. Ladies and gentlemen, extremism exists in every pocket of society. And in retrospect, 2019 reminded the world just that. The year saw many forms of extremism surface through numbers of horrifying attacks from non-organized groups and individual offenders. The one that all of us could never forget in this region would be the Christchurch mosque attack on March 15, 2019. 51 innocent lives were taken. This particular perpetrator actually made reference to the 2011 attacks in Norway. When that despicable incident took place, the world were focused on this region. While we were all shocked by it, we were equally concerned should there be a retaliation by the Islamic extremists. Violence is never a solution. Why? Because the one that suffers besides the players are the innocents, who has no clue or association with the beliefs nor the purpose. Nevertheless, just to share some facts, 2018 served as a great encouragement in the field of counterterrorism, picking up from positive developments in the year before. Sustained military operations led to the mass territorial defeat of Daesh in Syria and Iraq. With its physical location practically destroyed, Daesh's utopian idea of so-called caliphate has been obliterated. Daesh's online activity has also decreased significantly, especially in the open online platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and in various search engines. Ladies and gentlemen, as I represent Malaysia, allow me to share a little bit on the initiative by Malaysia in this context. Malaysia has been in full gear in its effort to counter the threat of terrorism, particularly Daesh, in recent years, by enhancing and strengthening existing policies as well as designing new strategies. In ensuring the effectiveness of such policies and strategies, the approaches taken by Malaysians are based mainly on enhancing legislation. The hard approach is taken up by relevant authorities in Malaysia, whereby immediate response to the terrorist threat was to strengthen the country's legislation measures. These include forming of new laws and enhancing existing legislation. Apart from hard approach, believing that multifaceted approach would be the best way in countering the threat, Siasat also was established to play the vital role in soft power responses. Among these responses include conducting public awareness and capacity building programs, as well as countering terrorist narratives. Apart from that, soft power responses include enhancing interagency cooperation, conducting public awareness programs for the public on the danger of terrorism. Also, we do correcting misinterpretation of Islamic concepts such as jihad and hijrah, as well as creating mental firewalls among students and youth susceptible to such violent ideologies. Ladies and gentlemen, Siasat has a strong collaboration with Australia in organizing programs under the umbrella of counterterrorism. For example, Professor Greg Barton from Deakin University is one of Siasat's collaborators for as long as I remember. So now we know that on the surface, how government agencies such as Siasat play its role in countering terrorism. We also need to ask ourselves what we can do to help contribute to overcome the challenges as well. The answer is we can. We could all contribute to a better world, a peaceful world that we want to live in, to together overcome these challenges. And one of the answers would be the concept of building resilience. If I have a bit more time, let me try to tie it up with challenges that...
We might just stop you there, Matsita. I think
sure.
Absolutely fascinating. And what we're getting is that in order to keep up with the changing face of terrorism and the increase of hate, and it's just becoming more sophisticated, obviously, there is so much more
that we can do
being done behind the scenes. And you've mentioned quite a bit of work, both internationally and with Malaysia, etc. And it's fascinating. So we will come back to you and explore more, and particularly in terms of the aspect of resilience. I would like to turn now to Craig Foster. And Craig Foster, you will all know, we've all seen him play as the former national football captain of the Socceroos, and he played 29 times for the country and is a very respected broadcaster in his own right, commentator of the history of the beautiful game. But apart from his commitment to sport, Craig also works tirelessly in the sphere of social justice through sport and programs with refugees and Indigenous children, using football to provide life opportunities. He is a refugee and human rights ambassador with Amnesty and works with various boards and committees. And we've and more recently has drawn attention to issues in Iran relating to Navid Afkari. Congratulations on your recent graduation too, Craig, and we'll pass over to you. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to be on such an esteemed panel on a really important day also. And I acknowledge the comments that came before. I also acknowledge that I am here sitting in Sydney on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, land that was never ceded, as I hope every Australian acknowledges, and that is a wrong that at some point this country needs to right. I might just cover briefly a couple of themes. The firstly is COVID, and then of course my main framework through which I do all of my social justice and human rights work is largely through sport. And I'm delighted that sport at least has a small position on this panel. So thank you for the invitation, because it's about time that sports stepped up here a little bit more forcefully. And you mentioned the case of Navid Afkari, the Iranian wrestler who was, we understand, or we are told, was executed publicly recently, we might say murdered. And it's a really interesting case into the ability and unwillingness of sport to advocate on really important social causes, and in particular on human rights. And within that context, there's 3 or 4 issues that we might talk about: refugees, climate, gender equality, and others. So firstly, COVID-19, I do feel, and I hope you agree, that it has been, whilst complex, and I want to acknowledge all of you who are in Melbourne and in Victoria who have really been having a horrible time, that it has been an opportunity for so many of us here and around the world to reconsider the position of the world, our position in the world, what we've built in society, the current sensibilities, trajectory, and what we consider to be laudable qualities of human beings around the world, and the aims and goals and mission that we all have on an individual, collective, social, and global level as humans. And as someone here within my own domestic and local context, what is it that I should be trying to achieve? And COVID-19, I hope, is an opportunity for us all to think a little bit more deeply about our relationships with others, about our commitment to social responsibility, about the concept of community, about not just ourselves, about which so much of human life now forces us to do so. And perhaps gives us all a sense of this concept of humanitarianism, this concept of shared humanity. And with that comes both rights and responsibility. And we've seen that most acutely within the Victorian environment. Within this context, one of the most troubling things, and I do believe that it has an impact on social cohesion, which, as we've heard from the eminent Charlie Allen before, is a very important aspect of positive peace, is around concentration of media and popular media characterisation of all of these issues. Over-concentration of media, which I believe that we do have in Australia right now, is a very considerable drag and weight on both an open democracy, on freedom of information, on transmission of accurate, truthful and non-ideological information that we're all seeking. And today, finding trusted sources of information, whether it's in relation to COVID-19 or other really often politicised issues, like climate and refugees, and we can mark them off. Those issues have become even more problematic for Australia and the rest of the world, in large part because the challenge that we all have to sift through the information has become more difficult than ever before, perhaps in human history. And that, to me, is a tremendous worry for our democracy and also for the very concept of peace. And certainly it is for social cohesion in Australia. The Social Cohesion Index, wonderful work to come out of the Scanlon Foundation, talks about many of the communities within Australian life who feel marginalised, who feel attacked, who feel as though they are not provided with adequate opportunities, and the narrative with which they are treated is improper and quite often untruthful, and I completely agree with that. So I just think COVID-19 is an opportunity for us all to perhaps recalibrate what life means for us all, and provide an opportunity to reconsider the importance of the shared humanity that we all have. Within this context, I'd like to spend a few moments talking about sport and peace, and in particular the responsibility that sport has to contribute to a better world. It's a responsibility that sport very often tries to avoid. There's a concept of the exceptionalism of sport, in which the sporting industry has convinced itself, and as part of its social licence, has convinced broader society that it shouldn't wade into areas which it characterises as political. But I would ask you, what is the difference between political or politicised? Let me give you some examples. Refugees and asylum seekers is a really important and topical one, certainly in my life at the moment. The sporting industry in Australia and around the world only a couple of years ago now stepped forward forcefully and advocated for the rights of a young Bahraini Muslim refugee. His name was Hakeem Al-Arabi. And yet, since that moment, which was wonderful, sport will naturally be reluctant to thereafter advocate for all Hakeem's brothers and sisters. And I ask, why should that possibly be? So what is the difference between an asylum seeker or refugee who Hakeem was, who's sitting offshore, or who's sitting in the APODs in Australia, or indeed is anywhere in the world? And the answer can only be that there is no difference. They are the same people. It's just that Hakeem happened to play football in Australia. And through that reason, through the social power of sport, we were able to advocate for him and to a successful resolution, thankfully. But what about all of the others? So if sport is capable of advocating for someone in a sphere of society whose human rights are being breached by another country, then why can't we equally advocate for every human being whose rights and whose human rights are being breached? And of course we should. Climate is another great example. So many people within sport, rightly, because we are part of society, we don't sit outside it, we are not exceptional in this regard, feel strongly about the state of the environment and the planet, as we should. And yet, asking sport to advocate for climate action, for what is a global issue that affects all of humanity, is challenging, because sport thereby says, well, that's political. Well, is it, or is it politicised? There's a difference between the two, and this is why I argue that human rights, in being embedded into the global sporting framework and becoming part of the substance of the conversations that we have within sport and from sport to broader society, is so critically important, because it takes the politics out of what are issues that sport, as a prominent, highly visible, highly influential social institution and an important part of every society around the world, is obligated to speak up on. The image that often occurs to me when it comes to climate, for example, is people playing sport while the world around them continues to burn. As ludicrous as that is, that's actually the trajectory, and that's the culture that global sport has tried to propagate, is that it has nothing to do with us. But just as a business, as an important part of broader society, is finding its voice in terms of social purpose, so too must football. Human rights are critical to be embedded within the frameworks of global sport. And finally, we had the case recently of Navid Afkari, is a really important example. Athletes around the world immediately stepped forward for a young man, 27 years old, whose rights, like many around the world, but happened to be in Iran, were being grievously breached. He was tortured to confess, and all of the aspects of his case you can read in the public domain. Athletes everywhere said, this can't occur. This sport has a responsibility to help shape a better world, and particularly in these moments when the rights of people within are being so grievously breached. And yet so much of global sport, including the IOC, the Olympic movement, under which wrestling is one of the core sports and a very important one in Iran. So, well, we can't go there. That's political. But is it? And if so, why? We're talking here about the concept of shared humanity, and it's time that sport stepped up here and around the world and raised our voice to create a better world, fairness and equality. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Craig. No, thank you very much. And I think, you've really touched on the paradox there with sport, in that, sport really does, it's there to connect people on the field, isn't it? It's there to bring people together, and that's where its power is. And yet we have some concerns about how it is taking up that space. So, Craig, we will come back to you. Thank you very, very much. I'd like to move on now to Associate Professor Tom Clark from Victoria University. He's the Chair of Academic Board and works at the university's flagship first-year college, and is a research fellow in the Institute for Sustainable Industries and Livable Cities. Now, I suggest you go and have a look at Associate Professor Tom Clark's resume. It's quite interesting, and he's actually got some really interesting publications, one of which is Talking Up a Legacy, Australian Prime Ministers and the Speeches We Remember Them By. And if you look at Tom's background, you'll see what has led him to publishing such an interesting book in 2019. So, Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. Sound okay? I think sounds okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, lovely. So thank you, Teresa, and the many good people behind you who've organised this event. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to my fellow panelists for an opportunity to learn from you, really, and that's a large part of why I got into the university game in the first place. Learning is a great way to live. So in 2020, peace for the adults in this household, which is in North Richmond, lands occupied by the Bunurong and Woiwurrung for thousands of years, and important to acknowledge their ongoing presence. Peace for the adults in this household means participating in an online meeting or event like this, while our children cooperate amicably in the background. I was thinking about that cooperation angle while Mazita was discussing soft power, actually, because it reminds us that conflict is normal. And then a question that goes with that is, does that mean peace is idealistic? I often wonder about this question. I think calling it idealistic is a pessimist answer, and calling it pragmatic or realistic is an optimistic answer. But anyway, the answer today seems as far away as it ever did. My background is words, really. I studied medieval literatures, but also I've worked as a speechwriter, and so I'm a bit of a dictionary diver. Peace is a word we get in English from very old roots. We inherit it kind of most directly from Latin via French, but its roots are older than Latin. They stretch back to that so-called Proto-Indo-European language that the theorists assume gave rise to so many of the languages from Bangladesh to the North Atlantic, including English. And peace is cognate with pact. I think this seems to chime with Charlie's term, positive peace, actually. The word carries an idea of actively guiding people through a shared future by common purposes, by agreement or treaty. And if I could show you images of treaty from early Canada, for example, or pre-colonial far North America before it even got called Canada, you'll see woven you'll see woven treaties throughout their fabric, and they have lines straight or somewhat squiggly moving parallel to each other. And that's the idea of peoples moving in a similar direction from the past through the present and into the future, at a common distance from each other. So the example of a treaty or agreement for reconciliation is very much uppermost in mind when we think about how peace works as a word. Reconciliation craves the company of truth. So this, I think, is the importance of knowledge, which is an in for universities, and the importance of honest and curious teaching and research. When movements for reconciliation have sprung out of some of the really awful conflicts since 1945, I think of South Africa, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Canada, Northern Ireland, there are other examples. They have often packaged this idea of truth and reconciliation. And it's an idea that Australia, that the Australian government, originally under Bob Hawke, made quite a conscious decision not to go with. You know, we wanted to pursue reconciliation and have truth as a separate question. You know, some skeptical, some optimistic maybe, but Australia deliberately did not go down the truth and reconciliation path, and that has had its consequences. You know, a kind of hangover of trying to talk about the future without being square about the past. So if you go back to the Uluru Statement, you know, not so long ago, you can actually see this exasperation coming through. The second and third last paragraphs say, Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. Now that hour is a kind of First Nations hour, and speaking to governments and in the public domain, speaking to everybody, you know, as well. But I've been involved in some really interesting research into non-Indigenous attitudes towards Aboriginal reconciliation in Australia and in Canada as well. I'm really struck by the way even quite conservative participants, you know, in places like Bega and Mount Gambier and Gladstone, quite conservative participants who are deeply opposed to compensations, say, or ideas of paying the rent and terms like that. They will still talk about the importance of getting a more honest recognition of the foundation of history that we build on. You know, I think there's a much greater willingness to encounter truths of the past than governments have assumed about Australia, and the Uluru Statement from the Heart was onto something in pushing this, and I think Malcolm Turnbull was really kind of conspicuously not onto something in denying and trying to ignore it. Anyway, he's not the Prime Minister anymore, and the Statement from the Heart hasn't actually taken hold in government action yet, but it's still there and it's still speaking to us. So the idea of truth as integral to the kinds of peace that we might build in our lives, in our country, I think also there's a danger of talking about people without people. Yeah. So the idea that people need to own truths about themselves. People need to be able to create the knowledge about themselves, to maintain it, to share it. And knowledge is difficult to talk about owning. It is difficult to talk about owning knowledge, but custody of knowledge is a very familiar concept to Indigenous Australia. It's a very familiar concept to all of us, frankly. We have to work with and respect ideas like this. I've been involved in some research in the city of Wyndham, actually. There are many examples like this at VU, and there are in lots of other universities and other places as well. But I've been involved in a project working in collaboration with the City of Wyndham with some really important support and help from the Scanlon Foundation, where we're trying to engage local communities to talk about the experiences of racism and Islamophobia, and what, you know, and reporting rates have been historically very low, and there's a sense of the need to give people a chance to say what they'd even like done about this stuff. If somebody experiences something, how would they like to work with it? So we're indebted to organisations like the Wyndham Humanitarian Network and the Wyndham Interfaith Network for helping us to reach communities. But the community organisations themselves, you know, that social cohesion building glue that Craig was emphasising earlier in his talk, these people really need a chance to say what they think is happening in their areas and what they think could be done about it. You know, a chance to actually build the solutions for themselves in their own communities. And I think that points to the work that universities have to do. A reminder on International Peace Day that VU is inherently in the knowledge business, so our teaching and research work can be tools of truth and reconciliation or not, you know, that's our challenge. But also VU is necessarily a community partner. We can offer our skills and experience to help communities create, maintain, share knowledge about themselves or not. And that too is our challenge. Yeah, we have to own those challenges if we're going to play our part in the work the world needs. The turmoil around us all in 2020, I think lots of us think of that as unpeaceful, or some are even calling it a state of war, even if it's often very quiet. It has been very hard on universities. I'm sure you all have a sense of that. But I hope you can see how determined we are not to let it distract from our very important work, and how we, you know, how we own the challenge of working with all willing parties to build peace. Thank you, Teresa. I might leave off there for now.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. And you have presented quite an interesting an insightful presentation that has touched on quite a number of the questions in the chat that have been coming through. So thank you. Going now to our last panelist in terms of presentation, we have Rohini Kapadath, who is the General Manager of the Immigration Museum. She is a Senior Executive in Technology and Professional Services sector, and has, you know, well over 25 years experience in building high growth business unit and startups. Rohini comes with a lot of experience in the international sector and understanding the international sector, and has certainly built the museum to being a vibrant and contemporary cultural institution that we all can't wait to get back to when in Melbourne, when we're finally out of ISO. But thank you. Over to you, Rohini.
Thank you, Teresa. I begin by paying my respects to our traditional owners for their custodianship of these lands for over 60,000 years. And today I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded by our First Nations peoples. I'm honored to participate in this important discussion on International Day of Peace, and thank you, Teresa and VU, for inviting me to join along with our distinguished panelists. Let me start by painting some broad brush strokes of some of the ground realities and the big tectonic shifts that are occurring that impact not only our notions around what peace means, but also our ability as a human community to achieve this elusive, perhaps utopian ideal, as Tom was saying earlier. We heard also from Charles Allen in relation to the Global Peace Index that the world is considerably less peaceful now than it was a decade ago as a result of increased terrorist activity, intensification of conflicts in the Middle East, and heightened political tensions in Europe and US. In 2019 alone, the number of people fleeing war, persecution, and conflict was close to 80 million. That's 3 Australias. And currently 2 billion people globally face moderate to severe food insecurity. The economic impact of violence in 2019 on the global economy was estimated at 14.5 trillion, which is about 10.5% of global economic activity. So the case for peace is strong. However, tectonic shifts are shaping our world today and impacting the context and complexity surrounding our peace-building efforts. And allow me to share some of these insights as they impact how we would together shape a 21st century model for peace. First, there is the reversal of globalization. Secondly, the tsunami of digitalization, which has irreversibly placed greatest power in the hands of the tech-savvy and those with the data. And third, the impetus for sustainability as a core principle in business to earn businesses a social license to operate. So let's unpack what this means for global peace. The open system for global fair trade, which supported peaceful coexistence and to which Australia is wholly committed, is coming apart. Our social systems like democratic capitalism are being challenged by their failure to be inclusive and to provide equitably for all citizens. And when considering global leadership, the convening power of a benign and outward-looking United States is absent for the first time since World War II, making it harder to address global challenges like climate change. And if we look at the financial markets, the separation of asset trading from economic innovation has promoted short-termism at the expense of true enterprise. And we've seen the Gordon-Gekko ethos loosen afoot. And in the absence of effective international institutions, we've converted international financial markets into a global casino. And on top of all of these issues is the ascendancy of China. One may argue that China's dominance was inevitable, but nobody saw the retreat of the US coming, and the power vacuum this has created is profound. And to top it all, we have now a once-in-a-100-year pandemic, which has shut down large parts of the global economic exchange of goods, trade, and people that has characterized our world for so long. It has accelerated the collapse of globalization as we know it. And humanity is currently facing one of the most serious crises in recent history. We're still in the planning stages of the strategies needed to reset and rebuild our nation from the economic fallout of this health crisis, and we're going to need all hands on deck. Industries are decimated, some seriously impacted. A 21st century plan for peace, positive peace, let's call it that, can no longer look to international institutions alone like NATO and WTO and the UN and IMF as arbiters. It demands a model that triangulates the private sector, the public sector, and civil society working together as equal stakeholders, taking ownership of a shared problem. Let's look at civil society. Inclusive institutions in civil society lie at the heart of everything. The likes of women's organizations, sporting clubs, special interest groups, friends of museums, Rotary clubs, business councils, particularly our youth-led institutions. And ownership of such a model for peace must be extended to each and every one in society, regardless of color, age, sex, or ability. Each one of us has a role to play. Look at government. Our peace-building efforts must go hand in hand with government efforts towards building greater resilience in our economy, with strategies such as diversification or investments towards future-proofing our economy. Social inclusivity and inclusive capitalisms are the new definitions of democracy. And we look to government to create mechanisms that allow speed of response. So the momentum of the National Cabinet was, for example, a great example of that kind of innovative, fresh thinking. Businesses are being called on to recognize that nature is finite resource and that businesses must be regenerative, not exploitative, and that we must do well in business by doing good. So in this context of shared ownership, Immigration Museum invested in reimagining its new vision and purpose following a period of community consultation through 2018. And our vision for the museum is, and Craig will be especially pleased to hear this, and I'm sure you might have heard this before, but it is people connected to our shared humanity and embracing diversity for a just future. Our vision acknowledges the importance of human connection to achieve social cohesion and peace, but also that we are all in this together. It is through this lens of shared humanity and universal themes that unite us in all of our diversity that we've developed our exhibition program over the last 3 years. The Love exhibition, for those who might have seen it, brought together stories from diverse collaborators representing all facets of love. We've also reflected the changing immigration and migrant experience, including that of first, second, and third generation migrants, temporary migrants, international students, asylum seekers, refugees, as well as those at the intersection of ethnicity and cultural heritage with other facets of identity, such as gender, sexuality, politics, disability. And the upcoming exhibition, Becoming You, will include the coming-of-age stories of 71 contributors, from the hilarious to the heart-wrenching, the monumental to the mundane. And our hope is that by sharing these diverse stories under central themes, we can create opportunities for empathy and understanding, which are the bedrock of peaceful coexistence amongst humans. A key role a museum like Immigration Museum can play in contributing to peace and social cohesion is through the promotion of intercultural understanding and acceptance. As a site of trusted knowledge on the history and contemporary life of Victorians, we've found that the closer we work with communities and the more we cede narrative control through a co-curation model, the better our outcomes are. So to this end, we joined a global movement started in the US aimed at making cultural institutions more inclusive and representative of their communities. It's called the Off by For All program, which envisions a world with communities in which people feel safe, welcome, and connected to the strangers who cross their paths every day. In recent years, there's been a growing recognition within the sector that museums have largely centered white Anglo-Celtic voices, history, and audiences, and that this needs to be addressed for museums to remain relevant in the 21st century. So, in conclusion, Immigration Museum's vision is an urgent call to unity and action towards building a better, more peaceful, more just future for all. We stand ready to forge new partnerships towards this shared endeavor. We're a fifth of the way into the 21st century, and there's a lot to be done. I'm ready for the challenge, and I hope that you are too.
Thank you, Rohini. That's very stirring. And we have had some very insightful and very interesting and extremely thought-provoking presentations, which have actually addressed quite a number of the themes that have come up in the chat and some of the questions. So we might go straight into a little bit of time for questions. Obviously, we're not going to get to every one of them. I think we need about 4 hours here, but we at least can touch on some of the ones that haven't been addressed so far, and we'll see how we go. And then afterwards, ladies and gentlemen, we do have some interesting entertainment that's been prepared by students at the university and some of the panelists and community peace makers in the community. So I'm just going to start perhaps back with Charlie. Charlie, there's a sense of how does the Global Peace Index and where do our Indigenous people sort of fit in? And we've had some discussion which has been terrific on terms of our history, and Tom's been sort of stepping us through that. But we do have a disturbing history of violence against our First People in Australia. To what extent is this reflected in the Global Peace Index?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So certainly, I just need to preface my answer with that the research that we do is macro level research, and it's covering off on 163 countries, and the work that we do is quantitative research. So we're really in the business of identifying data sets, drawing together those data sets, and making some sense of those data sets. So our researchers are quantitative people. It's very much about what they can count and put together to make sense of. Certainly in the Positive Peace report, draws on some of those themes. When you look to, I'll stick with the Global Peace Index. If you're looking at issues that we count, homicide rate, like it or not, but that is certainly impacted by errant states. The political terror factors that we bring in, so extrajudicial killings, incarceration without trial. So there are a range of indicators that we bring in. Now, incarceration rates is an interesting piece of data. It may come to some surprise to people that the country that fares worst with its incarceration rate is the United States of America. Incarcerate their citizens at an alarming rate, and Australia shouldn't get too comfortable, because if there was one indicator that dragged us down, it would be the rate that we incarcerate our citizens. So do we draw in views of Indigenous community? No, because it's quantitative research looking for things that we can count, but are the impacts of errant systems reflected in the indices? Yes, is the answer to the question through those countable quantitative indicators that we draw together. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Charlie. And again, please do go and have a look at that data. It'll take you a while to really digest it. Coming over back to Craig, there were some questions upon registration that pick up on what you've presented before, Craig. And you've talked about, you've talked about the responsibility of sport and the dilemma and the conflicting conversations around, how much responsibility does sport take, and where does the line stop? And yet we've seen sport take an increasingly very visual stance. People are taking the knee. There's all sorts of things happening around the world. There's a real agitation. Do you think this is a moment of time, and do you think sport is going to become even more articulate in this space? The second part of that question is, and I think it picks up on the theme that that is coming through in the chat, because everybody wants to know, what can we do? How can all of us as community people, as citizens, how can we join this? Is there scope? Thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Teresa. So I might just stick to sport when I answer both parts of the question then, for brevity. Firstly, yes, I do believe it's a really important moment, and I do think COVID and perhaps even climate and other truly global challenges facing humanity are playing into this. But we see really high-profile athletes all around the world using their voice as humans, certainly more than ever before, and successfully. And of course, their public platforms through social media and other aspects are broader, more immediate, and more powerful than we've seen before. They're collectivizing very well. They're supporting each other. And this has been driven very much by long-standing social causes, such as racial inequality in the US, where African-American athletes are both prominent and numerous. And so they're deeply embedded into the understanding of the social cause, into the civil society organisations who've been advocating that for a very long time, are able to educate the athletes. They feel confident in their voice, they're educated on the issue, it's personal to them, and they have social power and influence. So it's a really important aspect. What we're not yet seeing, and I believe that athletes are forcing onto sport, is sport as an institution, as an industry, as global governing bodies, finding their power in this space. I'll give you an example. And this is my trajectory in this issue over the last, having been a player and then post, an ambassador, lending your brand to causes, then going on the board, and all of a sudden, finally realising that there's political change that needs to occur. So sport is brilliant at, symbolism. So let's take Welcome to Country. So sport has Welcome to Country, and where it has an Indigenous round in almost every sport in the country of Australia right now. But where are we on Indigenous human rights under the Convention on the Status of Indigenous Peoples, for instance, or the rights of Indigenous peoples, which is self-determination, which is what Tom has been talking about. That's a human right. So it's not political. We're talking here about objective international rights under instruments that the global community has said, look, we think that this is important. That's why I think human rights education is so important for young athletes now. This is the safe space, in my view, through which they can find their voice. We have homeless programs, wonderful homeless programs through sport in Australia. But what do we say about homelessness? We have women's sport, and and many of us feel incredibly strongly that now is the time to embed equality. But what does sport do for gender equality more broadly? So the concept of these human values and the way that these communities are on a micro level are daily mistreated, if you like. This is where sport has to cross this line, but it crosses the line through this safe space of human rights. Refugees is another wonderful example, and I believe that sport should be speaking up for the rights of asylum seekers and refugees, both here and all around the world. They're human beings like us. Yes, they play sport, but they have objective rights under international law. And when any government here or elsewhere can change those rights on the domestic legal level, that doesn't abrogate the international, the objective human rights that these people have. And that ultimately is what sport is about. So sport has a wonderful platform to change the world, and I believe it can. What can you do? Let me just talk to people who are involved in sport then. What I would say to you is recognise the power that you have through your local sporting clubs, but to assist and to find your voice and be comfortable in actually supporting social causes locally, nationally and globally through the power of your sporting community. We are part of society. We are part of humanity, obviously, but it's, that has to be said to sport. Yeah. Use your voice, use your sporting platform. It's important.
Thank you, Craig. And you're absolutely right. And we have had that history. I mean, Nicky Widmar, raising his jumper. We've had that issue of where does sport go and what voice does it have? So thank you very much for that. I'm aware that we are actually up to time, and it's such a shame because we have so many questions. I'd like to just ask one more question, if I may, and I know the events team will probably kick me because everybody needs to get on. But I would like to just ask one more question because I did cut Matsita off last time. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we do have the entertainment. So I promise you we'll go out with that. But just very quickly, Matsita, we've had someone ask about how responding to online hate that is targeted towards individuals and community groups. What would you advise there, given your expertise? And just very quickly, and then we'll move to the rest of the program.
Okay, let me see. Teresa, okay, we are, yes, I saw the question as well. I think it's about how do you reporting comments about how do you on online platforms, something like that. Is that the question?
Online platforms, yeah.
Yeah. This is it. You can't fight hate with hate. You have to fight hate with love. So there's a lot of reporting comments is one way to do it, but we also must realize that online platforms is also one of our way to spread positive narrative. So we should use this platform to spread more positive narrative compared to negative narrative. Yeah, all of us could play that part. Yes, yeah, that will never end. Hatred speech and what will never end. But what can we do if we keep on using that platform as well to spread more positive narrative? Positive narrative has to be louder than negative narratives. Simple as that.
I think that's a really good note to finish the panel discussions and the Q&A with. So thank you very, very much. And, you know, I think that's the whole idea, is we all have an opportunity to shape peace. And that's, and so the discussion today has been hopefully inspiring and informative for everybody who's been able to participate, and this will go up on YouTube. Before we finish, and thank you again to all the amazing panelists, I'd like to now move over to Ahmed Keskin, who, as the Vice-Chancellor has said earlier, is a great friend of Victoria University and has worked tirelessly with me and with the university on a range of events. Ahmed is the Executive Director of the Australian Intercultural Society, and I'd like to pass over to Ahmed for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you to everyone for a wonderful and informative discussion. I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we are standing on, and I'm on Wurundjeri land. I pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, their elders past, present and emerging. On behalf of the co-organisers, I'd like to also express my deepest appreciation to everyone for their involvement in today's program. It's so important to remind each other of the natural disposition of our affairs being anchored on peaceful coexistence, where everyone has a right and place to belong. And this is underpinned by mutual respect, where we seek understanding of each other through their lens and be invited into their world. The significance of this day and the significance of it being marked is very important, and it's highlighted even more so during this period of uncertainty and challenges. And these challenges are there to obviously confront us, and sometimes are unfortunately doing a role in dividing us. But it is days like this which we should be reminded about our natural desire to come together and seek to coexist through peaceful initiatives. I'd like to thank all our speakers for sharing their wisdom, their experience, their insight. They have enriched the meaning of today, and I salute each and every one of them for the tremendous work that they do to make a positive difference. From my good friend Craig's tireless efforts to be the voice of the voiceless, to Charlie through his organisation and his personal endeavour advocating agency for the creation and sustainment of peaceful spaces, Mazita for her work in securing peace in society, Rohini for her stewardship of a museum which captures the stories of people seeking to live with each other with neighbourly love, Tom for his work in the university environment which promotes collegial ways of knowing about our similarities and differences and seeing those differences as a point of strength and for our growth. And of course, Teresa for her personal endeavours in promoting a respectful and inclusive place for everyone at her workplace and even society. I'd also like to thank and pay respect to the co-organisers, which is the Victorian Multicultural Commission, the Institute for Economics and Peace, and of course, Victoria University, who did the heavy lifting in today's program. And thank you to everyone who are behind the scenes. There's an army of them out there who are working to make sure that this program is running smoothly. There are too many to mention. You all know who you are, so thank you to each and every one of you. I just want to quickly take a moment to acknowledge and say thank you to the senior leadership team of Victoria University, and particularly say thank you to the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Peter Dawkins AU, for supporting this program, and many others during his term as Vice-Chancellor and President. As he mentioned, he's retiring this year, and I wanted to reflect on some of his achievements that he set out to do when he was given the role of being Vice-Chancellor. He wanted to run a university that was student-centred, staff-led and community integrated. And looking at his achievements, the way he's transformed the university, one could only marvel at his character and his leadership. As a neutral observer, I could see he's championed many initiatives such as the award-winning block learning model, establishing the VU Cultural Diversity Office, and other programs to reflect and support diversity within the university, for which VU was recognised by the VMC with an award. From a personal level, the AIS has been involved in several iftar dinner programs, which he has been the co-host, and we've very much appreciated his support in that. He's been a guest speaker at the AIS Lecture Series program, and we've enjoyed his support on many other initiatives, including the International Festival of Language and Culture. I wish him well in his new phase of life, and I'm sure we'll see him supporting important causes for many time to come. Naturally, these programs won't be where they are or won't come to fruition without the drive of the individual. So again, a huge thank you to the cultural diversity team at Victoria University for today's efforts, and apologise again if I've missed anyone. And especially thank you to our viewers for joining us today, marking this important day. And it's a shame we weren't able to do this face-to-face, because we only can feed off each other's energy to help emanate this peace for others. And I'm looking forward to that day that we're able to come back together. And I'm not sure if it's appropriate to sort of celebrate it in a way that you would in a normal festive day, but I'm going to call it and say Happy International Peace Day. I hope that we have many more important gatherings like this where we are able to remind each other of the importance of life, because the motto is life, we are in this together. So on that note, thank you again for joining us, and thank you to everyone for their contribution to today's program. Back to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Ahmed, and you're absolutely right. There is a team of people behind this. Our events team work tirelessly, and they are absolutely wonderful to work with, as well as our partners, Institute of Economics and Peace, Craig, BMC, Immigration Museum, AIS, etc. Terrific to work with you and finish off the year for our cultural diversity program. We do have two treats. I've mentioned them a couple of times because I really think that they're worth hanging around for. I know everybody would like to start their dinner preparations, but the first one is a Vox Pop, which was put together by featuring a number of people. So you'll see some faces, familiar faces, and was put together by our student Kitiant Chaponitut. And we also have a song by a very talented student, Temi Oligi. So thank you very much. As has been said, we are all peace shapers in our own way. So go forth and take part in and find your voice and continue in the good work that you're doing. Thank you and good night.
What peace means to me, having the people I love sleep contentedly.
Peace means working in the garden with Ilaria, creating beautiful flowers for everyone to enjoy.
Peace is respecting that everyone has a right to knowledge and education.
Peace to me is all about compassion, harmony, inclusion, and respect.
Peace to me means accepting others for who they are, being less judgmental, and embracing each and every one of us.
What does peace mean to me? Well, it's about living in a world where differences are embraced and individuality is celebrated.
What is peace for me? Well, peace for me is being able to sit on my front lawn, enjoy the sun, listen to the birds singing, while my son can play peacefully and freely in the park right in front of our house.
Hi, what peace means to me? Peaceful used to be a person that I'm being with, and I feel very peaceful. But now I discovered that being with myself, learn about self-esteem is the most peaceful thing in my life.
What's peace to me? Peace to me is having the opportunity to live in a fair society. Peace is justice.
Peace to me is finding a place which allows me to connect with the world without having to worry about anything.
What does peace mean to me? Well, peace to me is the opportunity to live wherever I choose, to love whomever I want, to use my voice without fear of retribution, to be heard, to hear others with compassion, to be able to live in a place where we are all valued. That is what peace means to me.
Peace is the implausibility of war, hunger, racism, environmental destruction, suffering, violence, abuse, and crime.
Peace for me is living in a place where my children, my family, my friends, and my community can have a healthy life, feeling safe, and having opportunities to pursue their dreams.
What does peace mean to you? To me, peace isn't the act of violence or conflict. It's about choosing the way to make ends meet in an equal, respectable, and commonly acceptable manner.
What does peace mean to me? Peace means not having to fear for your life just because of your gender, sexual orientation, color of your skin, and other beautiful differences that we all share.
Hi everyone, I'm Nado. For me, peaceful is the moment when you're working with people in different cultural backgrounds, different genders, they have different point of view. Even you have argument with them, but at the end of the day, you're still able to work together and make a good result. And that's the true peaceful.
What peace means to me? Peace means a community full of love and support for everyone, regardless of race, age, or gender.
Peace to me is having me time, listening to music, and reading my favorite book.
For the busted heart, this is for the question mark, this is for the outcast soul, lost control, no one knows, singing for the can't go back, singing for the broken parts, singing for the just found out, life is now upside down. If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your head, if you're feeling alone and don't understand, if you're trying to fight for your life, then we're gonna make it through this hand in hand, and if we fall together. This is for the second chance, this is for the new romance, this is for the loved in vain, overcame, it's not too late. If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your head. If you're feeling alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then we're gonna make it through this hand in hand. And if we fall, we will fall together. And when Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.